Hey, what's going on, guys? It's me, the Gaming Pig, back with another video, and we have some of the biggest Five Nights at Freddy's movie news we've had in so long. There's been FNAF movie news here and there recently this year, but it's never been big enough for me to talk about, but this is, it's massive news. We basically know that the FNAF movie is coming sooner than we actually expected, and we have word from Scott. This is ironically on a post named Bad News About the FNAF Movie, so I'm going to read through this post, and I'm going to give you my thoughts on it as we read. So let's just jump right into this. Hi everyone, before we get to the bad news concerning the state of the Five Nights at Freddy's movie, I wanted to share a brief history of FNAF Screenplay. It's been a long road, so let's take a look at some of the screenplays that have come and gone over the years, in no particular order, or feel free to skip to the end real quick to see the bad news, and come back and enjoy this list. Some of these came from big studios, some came from big directors, some came from me, and some came from other hired writers. I gave the screenplay and its names, and I'll include a brief synopsis, as well as ultimately what led to each screenplay being rejected. Let's get started. The F Screenplay. Basic setup: a group of teenage troublemakers break into FNAF and chaos endures. Problem: although it's a pretty basic setup, there were a lot of odd choices which got weirder as the story continued. The story ended with the protagonist in a secret underground animatronic factory that was designing robots for the government. Verdict: what the heck? Strayed too far away from source material. Tossed. So yeah, guys, that one in particular sounds very basic. It almost sounds like the Silver Eyes, but not. A bit worse sounding, very stereotypical, and definitely would not have been a great movie, especially when you get into the weird animatronics made for government. Yeah, definitely way too far from source material, so let's move on to the next failed screenplay. The Plushies Take Manhattan screenplay. Basic setup: Plushies take Manhattan. Problems: Plushies took Manhattan. Verdict: burned with fire. So I can't tell if this is a joke. He talked about it in the Daco interview too, so I tend to think that this is actually something that someone brought up, and it's just insane that this was even a thought. Definitely not what anyone would want as a FNAF movie, so yeah. Let's move on to the next one. The Random Charlie screenplay. Basic setup: Charlie and friends sneak into Freddy's after hours to retrieve a lost toy. Problems: although sharing names of familiar characters from the series, these characters had nothing to do with the games and book counterparts. So, while featured familiar elements from the games, it seemed too loosely based on the games and lost a lot of the impact because of it. Verdict: felt like a random bag of FNAF elements with no real stakes. Meh. So, yeah, again, Charlie was in the books as a main character, and Charlie was presumably in the games as the puppet, that the child that possesses the puppet. So it's very clear why he kind of didn't go with this. It's a random character that seems like it should have lore implications, but apparently doesn't. Very stereotypical again. Also, going in to get a lost toy seems pretty cheesy to me. So, you know, kind of not a great screenplay. I'm happy that he didn't go with that one either. But let's move on to the next one. The Silver Eyes screenplays. Basic setup: Kira and I worked on 3 versions of a Silver Eyes screenplay over the course of about a year, trying to find out the right approach to the story from the first book. Problems: these were my first attempts I made myself to write a screenplay after realizing it was going to be difficult to find someone who understood the lore as well as I do. Unfortunately, it also meant that these screenplays suffered greatly from my inexperience at writing. Even Kira, with her writing expertise, couldn't save them. Verdict: although these had some good elements, I ultimately decided to focus on making a screenplay for the games, not about the books. So I really understand this, and I would rather see a movie about the games, because there's so much we still don't really fully understand about the games, and the books are pretty clear on what they're trying to tell us. So I would much rather see a story within the game world rather than in the books. So that's my opinion on that, but let's move on to the next one. We're almost there. We're getting closer to the actual screenplay. Let's get into this one. The Pawn Shop screenplay. Basic setup: a kid who watches after a pawn shop finds trouble and an animatronic is brought in. It turns out Freddy's had been robbed, and animatronics were taken to different locations for sale. The other animatronics come to retrieve the one at the pawn shop, and the kid and his friends get roped into an adventure. Problems: a creative approach, but felt too much like Boy and his animatronic, too much like an after-school adventure, not enough horror. Verdict: seemed like a good idea at the time. So, once again, guys, this is very ridiculous. Honestly, not one of his best stories, if I'm being honest. Some of these other ones at least sound interesting. This one definitely sounds very bad. It almost reminds me of a Fazbear Fright story in certain ways, but also it sounds way worse than most of them, and I'm glad he didn't go with this one either, because in reality, this is just another strange... it has FNAF in it, but it doesn't really scream FNAF, so yeah. But let's move on to the next one, the Cassidy Screenplay. Basic setup: diving deep, this screenplay packed in a lot of lore following the story of Cassidy. Problems: spanning multiple time periods, following multiple characters, and featuring lore from multiple games. This was pretty saturated to a fault. It may have been satisfying to the most hardcore fans, but it would have left a majority of people confused and lost. Hey, wait, maybe this was the most accurate screenplay. Verdict: ultimately more visual encyclopedia than a movie. This just wasn't satisfying even to me. Out. So, again, just another one that... Honestly, this one almost sounds good to me, because Cassidy really diving deep into the lore, explaining it, but this would have been directly targeted at fans, and the fact that even Scott wasn't a huge fan of it definitely says something. I think this could be cool. I really want to see, I don't know, some sort of show or something, just diving deep into the lore for the fans themselves, so that way we get to understand the lore more in a more clear way, while not confusing a general audience of people that have no idea what FNAF even is. Now let's move on to the next screenplay, the Misfit Kids Screenplay. Basic setup: single mom brings her kid to new town. Kid finds Freddy. Hilarity ensures. Problem: one of the problems with creating a modern-day story with old Freddy settings is finding a way to connect the protagonist to the restaurant, finding a reason for them to be there, and finding a reason for them to stay. The problem here is that the reason for this kid to stay, to go to Freddy's and having misadventures, was too contrived and too forced. Verdict: it was not a bad setup, but just didn't work. If you don't care about the characters, then there's a good chance no one else will either. Pass. This was the screenplay for a while, because there weren't any serious flaws. I ultimately decided that it wasn't good enough, though. Okay, so again, this one, it really feels like a lot of these may have inspired him for some Fazbear Frights, because this one, particularly, it really centers around the character in this town. They go to Freddy's for some reason, and craziness happens. This reminds me of the Fazbear Frights, because in most of them, really what happens is they go to Freddy's for some reason, and some crazy thing happens. And this is what it seems like, too. And it seems like he really wanted to focus it on the characters, but you couldn't care about the characters. So I definitely understand why this one was passed. Not a very interesting sounding one to me. Again, we're almost there, guys. Almost through the screenplays and going to get to the actual one. So this one is the Ghost Trackers Screenplay. A basic setup: a group of amateur ghost trackers sneak into an abandoned Freddy's. Problems: although a very common sense setup for this sort of movie, the problem again arose about giving these characters connection to Freddy's itself. What ended up happening was too much of the story on their own backstories and their own hardships, and it took the spotlight away from the story at Freddy's. Verdict: a stronger connection between the protagonists and Freddy was needed. Lesson learned. Okay, so this one, again, he really, really, really wanted to focus on the characters, and kind of drowned out the whole Freddy's story, to where, we wouldn't really get much lore, much answers, much interesting things at Freddy's, and it would be more about these random ghost trackers that we didn't really know much about. It could be interesting, but I really don't see it in any way being too enjoyable. So let's move on to the next screenplay, being the Insane Screenplay. Basic setup, another ghost tracker variation. This one involved the Funtime animatronics, underground ball pit tunnels, and the marionette out for revenge. Problems: as some of the other screenplays ventured too far into adventure, this one went too far into action. Verdict: too all over the place with too many characters doing too many things. Okay, so he saw his last screenplay, and he basically was like, okay, the characters are getting too fleshed out, like, to the extent where there's no other things going on in the story. Let's add more action. And that kind of turned on him too, because he's like, well, now it's just, it's all action. We got the fun times, we got the marionette, which would be really strange to a general audience to just have these random fun time animatronics and a puppet out of nowhere. So I definitely get why he scrapped this one. Let's look at the final screenplay. This is the screenplay that he went with, spoilers, but let's get into this. The Mike Screenplay. Basic setup, this makes sense. Why didn't I think of this before? Problems: actually, this is a good mix. It has all the best pieces from all the previous screenplays. Not really any problems here. All the characters have the right motivations and the right stakes. Verdict: yeah, we're going with this one. It's fun, it's scary, it has a great central story. So I'm gonna try and talk about this, but basically we don't really know too much. It's called the Mike Screenplay. Mike being the security guard, if he's talking about Mike Schmidt, aka Mike Afton. There you go, you got a FNAF 1 screenplay. Basic, what happens at FNAF 1. Maybe we get to learn why he keeps coming back to Freddy's every night. You know, stuff like that. It seems like he very much realized that he should have just gone with this in the first place. So I definitely see this one panning out to be a really good one. But let's read, there's just a little bit more. Oh, right, so on to the bad news. The bad news here is that there won't be any more screenplays to add to this list, since we're officially making the Mike Screenplay. Filming starts in spring. Okay guys, so the FNAF movie is officially filming in spring, and they're going with this Mike Screenplay, like, no doubt about it, that's what they're going with. Whether they found actors, you know, they've got a cast yet, I don't know. We don't know anything other than they're starting to film in spring of 2021. Amazing stuff. Honestly, 2021 is going to be such a big year for FNAF. They're going to start filming the movie. I'm assuming the movie is going to come out into the later half of 2022, meaning that we'll probably see this October, December, November area, somewhere around there, I would say. That's just my guess. It would make sense. Of course, they're kind of holding off filming till spring, and they're going to be careful about it because of COVID, but movies have to start filming now, otherwise Hollywood isn't really going to get out of this. But point is, it's starting to film, and we finally have big information on this. I am really excited, to be honest with you guys. This is the biggest FNAF news we have ever had, and it was fun to look at all of these screenplays and see kind of where he went as far as his plans with this movie, and eventually went to a pretty good sounding screenplay. But let me know what you guys thought in the comments down below. Did you like this video? Are you excited for the FNAF movie? And were there any screenplays that you thought would have been better than the one he's chosen? And are you excited for the screenplay? And what do you think this screenplay is going to be about? Just let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I will see you guys next time. Have a great day. Take care. Bye.